Hello, welcome to the BDR.net lunch gathering videos. We get together every Thursday at 2 p.m. Eastern, and we cover a wide range of topics. So we invite you to enjoy this one and come visit us any Thursday that's convenient. We're at www.thebdr.net. That's thebdr.net. And we'd be happy to show you the engineering articles, IT articles, history articles, things that you'll find of interest. So again, thank you for coming. Enjoy the video. Take care. I think we're going to have a pretty interesting group today and meeting. I see some new folks and new faces, and welcome. If you were given the link today for the first time and you would like a reminder, I do send out one every Tuesday to remind you of the link, or you can just put it in your favorites on your browser, and that will work as well. It's now the 6th day, as I understand it, that the online live streams at Cox Media Group are still off across the country. No resolution. We also found on Monday that many websites went down due to an internet disruption. And we also found out that JBS, the meat packing company, spent $11 million in ransom on their system this week. So we're going to talk about this a little bit. Cyber News points out, by the way, that 8.4 billion passwords have been stolen. And that's something we want to talk about. But before we get to cybersecurity and the things that we want to do to make sure that our stations and systems are solid and safe, we want to talk for a few minutes about the FCC's action. They're going to have their open meeting on the 17th next week, and EAS is one of the things that's on the agenda. There's going to be, as you know, rule changes for EAS and WEA, including preventing people with cell phones from opting out on certain alerts. And there's going to be some more changes to event code and origination codes. And then, of course, this whole thing about persistent alerting, keeping that going. And then we have the other issue here about whether the internet is an appropriate place to do more alerting. Ed Zarnicki is agreed to talk with us a little bit about what's going on there. And Ed, I hope you're open now. And Ed? He's there. I see him. But he should unmute and come up with us in just a moment, I hope. But the idea here is that the comment period on the notice of inquiry ends on Monday. So if you are going to think about making some comments with the FCC about these things, that will be the last opportunity before the open meeting this coming Thursday.
Barry, hey, it's Ed. Sorry, I had to switch from internet to a landline connection.
Okay. Well, you're there, so we're glad to have you. So Ed, you had a couple of comments here about the NOI that is ending here on Monday, as well as the things that the commission has already made their decisions on, you think?
Yeah, we're steamrolling ahead, and I guess that's the only way I would call it, steamrolling ahead. We're being steamrollered ahead for a June 17th meeting at the commission. It's open, but it's going to be internet only. I'm sure. They're looking at 3 new rulemakings, and I'll blast through them because I know this type of area isn't everybody's cup of tea. It's my obsession, but not everybody's cup of tea. On the notice of inquiry, there was as Barry said, the reply comment period is still technically open, but but responding to pressures, timeline pressures from Congress, the FCC jumped ahead with a notice of proposed rulemaking and a further notice of inquiry already, and that'll be decided on at the June 17th meeting. So where are we now? They're still inviting comments on reply comments, that is, on broadband and streaming alerting. We'll move past that. It's probably not what you guys really want to talk about. But the other part is the EAS rulemaking. EAS part of the rulemaking. So in the rules that are going to be adopted pending June 17th and publication in the Federal Register, it would mandate false alert reporting for broadcasters. So a broadcaster would have to contact the FCC and notify them of the false alert. But the FCC again declined to specifically define what a false alert is. That's a question I raised. I think Gary Tim raised it and others. You know, you're making a statutory obligation for broadcasters to have to report something, but you're not defining what that something is. They said, well, common sense. We're not talking about a spelling error and alert. We're talking about something that's noticeably false. I'm not real pleased with that, but it is what it is. By the way, WEA will also have to report false alerts. Interestingly enough, and this gets to lobbying power and arcane regulations, it's not broadcasters that have to file, I'm sorry, it's not wireless operators that have to file a false alert report. It's actually the emergency manager who should be encouraged to file a false alert report if they hear it on a wireless phone, and to go to the same source, fccops.gov. Very strange situation. The other part, and I know this is probably going to be near and dear to Richard Resman's heart, is the changes to SEC plan reporting. Those will become a matter of law if the commission adopts the proposed changes, where these SEC plans would have to be state EAS plans would have to be uploaded to the alert reporting system and to for the FCC's approval, which of course is completely opaque to the rest of the broadcast community, completely opaque to cable operators, and absolutely opaque to us little EAS manufacturers who tend to use those plans quite a bit. So I think an open dialogue needs to be, if it's not going to be the FCC helping the world, who else is going to be a good source for hosting these EAS plans so stakeholders can actually use the darn things.
I think one of the things,
ahead,
Ed, that was in the notice is that they're going to combine the ETRS with the ARS. So that should be a very interesting combination.
Yes, it should be. And hopefully they fix the ETRS, but somehow I'm not optimistic. I'll just stop there. The other part of this June 17th thing on EAS is a further notice of proposed rulemaking, and that real quick is to tackle the proposals from FEMA to get rid of the National Information Center, the NIC event code. So rather than define it, it's never been defined, they're going to get rid of it. I don't think anybody's going to cry about that. Also, they're asking a question of whether the EAN code should be replaced or just the semantic meaning of EAN, the text output and the audio output. That should be redefined. Keep the code, but change the meaning from emergency action notification to a national emergency message or something like that. I'll just say I'm a proponent. I think our company is a proponent of getting rid of the EAN because there are many copies of recorded EANs out there already, and with no date or year stamp on them. If we're going to limit false alerts and spoofing, let's just move off the EAN. It's been done. There's also the suggestion to replace the PEP org code with something else that's more human understandable than primary entry point, which most people, including broadcasters, don't really know what that means. Replace that with something like Federal Alert Source or something. those are some of the burning issues with EAS, ducking many other issues that we've asked them over the years, but those are the ones the FCC is looking to tackle. They're also raising the question. I know this is primarily a radio group on the line, but they're asking the question about persistent alerts. That is, Congress mandated the FCC to take a look at the issue of repeating an alert at least twice. And the FCC answered that by saying, hey, if an authority wants to repeat an alert, they could just repeat the alert, send a new message. That's a big, slippery slope. If people start getting encouraged to send repeated COVID alerts every hour over the EAS, but let's wait for that to happen before we comment further on it. Persistent alerts in FEMA's mind means what else can be done to, during, if there's a national emergency and the national emergency is 4 hours long, repeating a message twice doesn't help if somebody tunes in after that alert is scrolled twice. So they want to figure out some way, or in radio, air twice. So what else can be done as some kind of indicator that there's an ongoing national emergency? I kind of applaud FEMA for trying to gate this as a national emergency thing. It's not what New York City wants to do, which is complete control over everything. I grew up in New York City, and I have pretty stark disagreements with my former town folk up there. But they want complete control of the system. In audio and for radio systems, the question is, what more can radio do to display and air a persistent alert? They're looking at HD radios, the Ubiquity folks, who said, hey, HD radio can put on icons or graphics for the duration of the alert. That could be a form of persistent alerting. I'm sure the Ubiquity folks would love any form of, especially mandate for an HD radio feature like that. I'm speaking out of turn there, but I would imagine it wouldn't hurt their cause at all. They're also looking at filings that I did, both the Digital Alert Systems and the Next Gen Video Information System Alliance, in terms of the VIDS display capability that is a recommended practice from the Alliance. That's a voluntary specification, but can put an icon on screen with a character generator for the duration of the alert. But the FCC, I think, has confused that capability with ATSC3, Next Gen TV. But there are proponents within the ATSC3 community that want to use that system as a supplement to EAS as well. So a lot going on. The FCC is confused, but at least they're asking the question before making a decision.
Thank you.
I'm almost out of breath, so I'll go over the last 2 months, but let me take a break. Yeah, Barry.
Thank you, Ed. I appreciate that. The main thing here is, around the country, things will range from extremely active SECC and LECCs to organizations that virtually don't exist. And yet the FCC, under the pressure from Congress, is essentially telling everyone that now the SECC has to put together the state plan and has to update it regularly and has to use this behind the wall system. And of course, everybody else, here we are, trying to figure out how EAS is going to meld into our lives with the part mandatory, part voluntary system that we have.
Well, Barry, I'll toss this one over maybe to Richard if he wants to chime in. Yeah. We haven't talked about this at all, so it's kind of a blindsiding Richard here. But the rule would allow the governor of a state to determine the composition and verify the composition of an SECC. So the FCC explicitly declined to adopt proposals to provide a recommendation on SEC composition. One size doesn't fit all, but they also ignored something I wrote, which was basically there's no guarantee you're going to have EAS stakeholders on an EAS committee if the governor of a state is thinking about this in classic, well, this is a government activity, so New Jersey. Not to pick on New Jersey, but let's pick on New Jersey. Maybe the governor of New Jersey, New Jersey State Police decide this is purely a command and control function. I can see that happening. I've been in enough of those meetings to realize that despite the best efforts of Paul Rotella and New Jersey broadcasters, New Jersey State Police's mentality is what it is. It's a classic public safety agency, and they're seeing EAS as a public safety tool. What's the guarantee that an SEC will actually have broadcaster, and never mind cable, participation in it? So maybe I'm being too libertarian here, but I'm a little concerned that that gives a lot of potential power to the governor in defining and potentially redirecting the composition of a state emergency communications committee, and potentially distracting its work into things like WEA and social media alerting away from broadcast. But I'll stop there.
Well, that's the reason we bring this up today. It's not that we can solve the problems, although many of us, Mr. Dave Klein and some others, have reached out to the FCC, first of all, to talk about this NPT and the fire drill that we fear is going to be part of that, but also the ongoing issues that Ed brings up. Richard, I'm sorry. Richard, did you want to add something to this before we move on?
Yeah, I want to thank Ed for bringing that up, because that is my concern, is that it goes beyond what Barry said. It really does open a previously locked back door to put state emergency management agencies in charge of plans. And I have not decided if I'm going to stay on as a state chair for California. I now am, as some of you know, because Jim Gabbert, who had been chair since the dark ages of EBS, retired a month or so ago. I don't know if I want to get involved with them at this level. I've always viewed this effort as a public-private partnership, and the minute that one side or the other feels that they are the senior partner and move ahead in their own direction, then we've lost that element of public safety, public service cooperation that where this thing all started. I think we've already lost a lot of. I'll use a phrase I used in my comments that I filed. We've pretty much have down the road of losing the hearts and minds of the broadcast licensees.
Well, we've really had a major problem there for a long time, because most of EAS has fallen on the tech department, and the tech department does not have full control over programming, if my mouth would work, and it does not have the GM's blessing, other than to do what the program director says most of the time. And as I've personally, and I've said this many times, until you get GMs and PDs to invest, EAS can't live up to its full potential, other than is running these mandated things every week or every month. And yes, there are places like Washington State where everybody's working together, but then there are a lot of other places where if you sit there and you ask them who's on the SECC or the LECC, you don't even get an email response.
Yeah. The other thing I want to say is that what's getting lost in the dust here is the fact that broadcasting is the only way to notify the American public about anything when the internet and cell phones go down. And I did mention that as part of the comments I filed, but I'm not sure the FCC is ready to take their eyes off the bright, shiny new digital objects yet.
God forbid that they decide to have the post office send out mail to alert people.
It would arrive late.
Well,
there is that.
Let me pose something for Richard then. This is a little bit out of my wheelhouse, either our alliance or company, but NAB, NASVA, BWWG, whomever, or all three. There's exactly 7 days before this meeting. And in-person meetings and calls are probably out of the question, but if there's a strong sentiment among SEC chairs if there's a way for them to send a strongly worded, clear note to each of the commissioners explaining why that rule, proposed rule and governors is incomplete, if not defective. I really suggest that's something you guys might want to spend an hour or two doing over the next couple of days.
Okay.
At the price of an email, it's worth it, I think.
Yeah, it would be, and it's something I'm considering doing. I have no idea where NAB is on this, but NAB and NASBA tend to work alike in a lot of this stuff, and there's basically there is some sentiment that I know in some NASBA people, and maybe at the NAB now, to just let this all happen. Maybe they see this as a way to, a way to the future, but I think it's a way to more quickly further damage to broadcast alert and warning.
Richard, in your experience, in the people you know and talk to, do you find a feeling that a number of SEC people and LECC people are planning to resign, stop volunteering for this expanded power grab?
I think they're waiting to see what happens. I honestly don't know what I'm going to do. The training for the new entry system to bring everything up, I actually got it in the last 15 minutes of that FCC training Zoom the other day. I didn't pick it all up, but I am right now in California, a long, thin state that where a lot of the local committees have evaporated. I don't know how I'm going to do that. So this is something that some states they're all up to date. I still look at Washington State as the poster child for how to do everything right and create that public-private partnership. We had it at one time in California, but due to political changes on both sides of the aisle, we no longer have that right now. Although I will say the legislature has done something, and I finally have a human being to deal with at Cal OES who seems to be on the right side of this, but that's only one person. I don't know how our boss feels about it yet. So to be determined.
Invite you to keep us updated if you would.
Well, I'll post my resignation letter publicly on the resource.
All right. Well, let's move on here to security, physical security, computer security, backup security. We were talking about computer security the other day, and somebody says, "What about getting out to a transmitter site? What about my physical security?" And so we want to cover that too, but I'd like to just start out by talking about this Cox Media Group issue. If there's someone that knows, either because you are working with them or close to them, appreciate knowing what today's situation is, other than that they're still said to be offline for all their streaming activities and still crippled for internal network things. But with Cox, with JBS, I got an email that two other groups of broadcasters, small groups, have been hit with ransomware recently. Malicious programs designed to steal money have more than quadrupled in the first quarter of this year from last year. This is the sort of thing where Dave Bialik's article about ransomware, is it real to each one of us? I'm not on the East Coast. I didn't stand in a line to get drive in a line to get gas last month, like so many did. But yes, that touches everybody in a real way. And so one of the issues here, according to one of the cyber security gurus, is that the problem that companies that focus only on ransomware mitigation, as important as it is, are missing the real problem. And he says the need to construct, combine, operate, and observe software in new ways is so important. And he referred to a thing called the Peltzman theory. And according to that, like seat belts, some feel that the fact that we have anti-malware software now secures them. And so in cars, after seat belts, the number of accidents didn't go down, although fatalities did, because people felt enabled to do whatever they wanted. And so we're finding the same thing here with cybersecurity issues. And it's kind of amazing when you consider how these things are. One of the things that we noticed the other day was the number of passwords that are compromised, and this has just got to have you really stunned. I just did this. This is one of the sites that talks about the number of passwords leaked. I just typed in password, and here we, count them out. How many times have people used this and it's been leaked? It's worth checking, not to force people to change passwords every 30 days or whatever, but to check to see if passwords are at risk. And so this is something that we want to talk about. And the terminology that I find is overused.
Actually, Barry, can I jump in there?
Yes, Ed.
I'd also urge caution on using services like that, especially if they're tracking IP, because you're basically typing in passwords to an unknown source. So unless you're completely confident about what sort of service you're using to test passwords, some of them, which are ghost hosts out of Russia, are actually password mining sites.
Good point. Good point. And so that's something that you might want to take a look at. There are a couple of them that seem to be honest and straightforward. Am I Pawned is one, and this particular one appears to be safe as well. But I use the word password as a check. So
Barry?
Yes, David.
One thing that I sort of have noticed, and the reason in my article, I definitely got lucky because it could have been a lot worse. And luckily I got it right at the time of the infiltration, it looked like, because since I was able to solve it right away. But at a radio station, you sort of have employees that have a lot of apathy. So if they see something they can't access or something, they're not going to tell anybody. And then it gets worse and worse and worse, and it snowballs. And I suspect that's what happened at my former employer, not to be mentioned today, but we all know who they were. It happened twice where people saw, oh, I can't access this. I'm going to go out to lunch and then I'll deal with it. Guess what? Every minute counts. And I think the biggest problem people have today is they're not educating their staff to say, hey, if I see a problem like this, notify right away. And what's the first thing all smart engineers do is we pull those plugs on those computers right away. We don't care how they shut off. We just kill the power, kill the network cable, and we work at solving the problem, because we know that it can snowball, but no, a salesman or a programming person, they don't, and they just let it go, and that's what can happen. And I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir on this.
Well, I would certainly never tell anybody that you worked for Entercom at any point. But yeah, it's amazing. And this is just a little list of broadcast-oriented folks that have been hit. And it's by no means an exhaustive list, but you can see that it's got some very large names, and it's got some very big groups. So this is a real problem. And I invite anyone that would like to chip in. You can either unmute and join us, or send me a quick note here in the chat box, and I'll call on you so we don't get too many collisions here.
I can chip in a little bit on David's comment.
Thank you.
And I'm glad he brought this up. My view is People will spend thousands of dollars on high-end routers running high-end security software, and yet there is no focus on staff training. And that's at least as important as that sophisticated router. That was kind of interesting when doing some of my work for another organization. I found out that LA County has a mandatory annual training for all staff. That's all staff. And there's no way out of it. You got to do it. And that's the kind of thing we need in addition to all the other things, because a well-trained staff is really your first line of defense. Because the way ransomware works, as we all know, and some of us, be included from painful experience, all it takes is somebody clicking on a bad link and you're off to the races. So, and yes, people sometimes don't tell you, and that's very bad. I won't go into the details of one such incident I had where almost lost some stuff because it was almost a week before I found out. And by the way, I have to give a little nod to Dave Marquette, who really saved our bacon with something people don't think about. Quotas, file quotas, because, well, people, it's a pain in the ass. They run out of quota. But it was the only way that Dave figured out you could stop ransomware, because what they had to do was take ownership of a file under the user they had compromised and then encrypt it. Well, when they got to the quota limit, guess what? They couldn't go any farther. And that saved us a lot of grief, because they got, I don't remember what it was, it's something like 1 or 2 gigs. Bam, they were shut out at that point. They couldn't go any farther. Had that not happened with this particular user, we might have had most of our server messed up before the day was out. So training. That's my piece.
Well, that's a good point. And one of the comments here that we had in the chat from Ted Langdale was how many small stations have training as a standard operating procedure. And the problem is not necessarily. John Mckay, got your hand there. John Mckay.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, it took me a moment. I'm in the, and one thing that we do in the Navy Reserve Society to defend the entire free world is once a year you have to train on computer security and the like. Much similar to what you just had somebody on your last name Mckay spoke before me. I'm really building on his suggestion by saying this.
Yeah, we seem to have a little bit of a problem, John. Your connection's a little thin.
The ransomers don't want him to speak.
Yeah. Mark, Morris?
Yeah, we took a hit with ransomware about 3 years ago. Took us about 3.5 days to recover. Fortunately, we had 2 different backups, and we had replication of the programs, but what took us the time was trying to, you have to completely take everything off the network in order to do the rebuild and get everything back to where you had it.
Mark, a question. Talk about those backups. Now, your backups should not be on the network.
No, actually one of the backups is out on the cloud. And then we have a NAS backup as well as the replicator server that replicates everything.
So do you turn it on, or do you have a switch to segregate it from your?
It disconnects. Yeah, it disconnects it from the network once the backup's done, and keeps it just sits in hot standby basically off the network, and then when it's time to do a backup, it reconnects to the network again.
Also, if you happen to have tapes or USB hard drives or something, it's not a bad idea to rotate those and put one of them off premises somewhere.
That's
with
correct.
A staff member or something.
That's right.
That way, if you lose access to your building, you're covered.
Yep.
And it's really important to teach the staff why the backup is important, instead of having it sit in a secretary's purse and then getting caught in the rain or something and then things ruined, which I've seen happen.
Well, and I've heard this a lot from people on here, and even looking at the comments, that education is a big thing. And our IT people here really, really promote that to get the, get staffers educated on what to do and what not to do. And for
Before
the
we
most
leave-
part, go ahead.
The problem with most broadcasters, at least in the major markets, they only want to see people bringing in money. They don't want to ever have to expend money. And they have to be taught that this is a cheap insurance policy, because you have to talk to them in financial terms. Otherwise, it'll never get done.
One of the important things to remember also about backups is you've got to test them. You can't just make backups and put them aside and hope that when you need them, they're going to be there. Mark, you're shaking your head. Does that mean you had an experience where a backup turned out bad?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. In fact, years ago, we had a NAS that we were backing up to, and it failed. And we just about lost our whole spot library. Fortunately, we were able to recover from one of the drives in the NAS, but the rest of it was totally dead. So I've told IT I don't want to rely very much on the NAS. I mean, the NAS is nice for an on-site backup, but I don't like to rely on that.
With 5 or 6 terabyte hard drives available now at Costco for about $100.
It's cheap. It's cheap insurance.
Citadel Broadcasting had a policy for IT along those lines, but you were supposed to, in your log, once a week, do a restore of something, whether you needed to or not, but go in, find a file, and do a full restore of that file to make sure that not only is your backup good, but your system will actually be able to restore a file, which is kind of a different part of the equation.
Yes, yes.
thing you got to watch out for is that when you do the backup or the restore, you're not corrupting your active system. You really need to test it on a backup system.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah, except then what if there's something wrong with your online system? It's not much trouble to do a test restore of a server. You should be able to do that without having any effect on your infrastructure.
Dan Mamone texted here that when one of his users got a ransomware screen, he got immediate notification. Now, how fast does ransomware work here? It seemed to me that if you get that screen, it's already churning through your files.
With my latest one that I wrote up, when the guy shouted, "Hey, I can't get it to my file," he had around one directory that was really bad, and it was creeping. It was slowly creeping down the server. I caught it in time, but it's been my experience that it grows, and its growth it goes exponential by people accessing directories. Unless you have paths. If you have mapped drives, then you're really screwed. I found that it goes faster in mapped drives.
Dan, did you want to add to that?
That was something we avoided too, was mapping drives. After our ransomware attack, that was something the IT folks said, no, we don't want to map drives.
Just for everybody that may not have caught that the first time, what's wrong with mapping drives?
Mapping drives, because when you turn on your computer and it's infected, it's seeing that drive as a local drive right away, and it says, okay, this is my free pass to go attack right away because I already have a path to it. I'm already logged into that drive.
Exactly.
I'm sorry, that's my layman's description.
No, but
Pretty good,
that's what
pretty good.
that's what we want to do, is we want to make it so everybody can understand what's happening here. Now,
Hey, Barry.
yes, sir.
Well, another thing somebody mentioned there in the chat is, besides the obvious, on-air automation systems, one really ought to think about backing up the traffic billing, accounting, and personnel stuff, because all that will make your life just not good if it gets out of control too. I mean, if you run commercials, you can't bill for them, you're sunk.
Our automations, we have made every effort on ours to make sure the automation and on-air stuff was air gapped from the business side as much as we could.
Question has been raised. The question has been raised here. Is the idea to pull the power plug on a PC? Disconnect.
So
Yes.
you can get to it,
Because-
absolutely.
Yes.
Because sometimes, Barry, pressing the power button gives the malware a trigger to go, because it's not a power button. It's just a suggestion that the computer should power off.
All right.
Why
Disconnect
wouldn't you
the
pull
Ethernet.
why wouldn't you pull the network connection immediately?
You
You
could
could
pull
do
them,
that too,
pull them
yeah.
both.
It'll continue to encrypt the local files.
Yeah, but you're off of
Yeah.
everybody else.
But then you
Yeah.
disconnect, sever it from the network so it doesn't spread
AC
over the
power
network.
handles all the eventualities.
Exactly.
Put that power cord first.
Your first goal should be to isolate the problem. If you can isolate it to a single computer, fine. You should also, and I've said this in the past to management, I said, make a chart of what is your priority if something corrupts your network. Is it your billing that's first? Is your files first? Because I had one attack where the guy said, oh, you got to save my family pictures first. And that's not going to save the business.
No.
Rob Enders makes the point, and it's a good one, that we often have to go past. One of the best ways to limit the damage is not allow users local admin
Yes.
privileges.
So what I want to know is, when are automation companies gonna get serious about security?
Thank you,
Because
Nathan.
every Windows-based automation system that I am familiar with, which is at least 3, RCS Next Gen, Encode DAD, and Wide Orbit, require you to be logged in 100% of the time as an administrative user. Now, I know for a fact that there are Windows tools where you can run programs as an administrator without giving the user account administrator access. We have to do that for our access control software for the doors.
It's
I don't
very,
remember what the tool's called, but I figured it out.
very true. I'll go back over 20 years with Audio Vault, and I can't say that it is the same today. But not only was it demanding administration rights, it hard coded the user and password.
Yeah, and so I've raised the issue to RCS because that's what I work with now on multiple occasions. They never have a good answer, and I even set up a system once where I forgot to give that user administrative privileges. It seemed to work okay, but then when I finally had to call support for something that wasn't working right, they went back in there and changed it.
But yeah, does
And-
anybody
And
use-
if anybody knows RCS, you know there's a username and a password that they standardize, and I think,
so does
I
White
mean, you
Orbit.
could change it.
So does White Orbit. Does anybody use multiple authentication? Because we've started doing that here, where you
Uh,
have to multiple authenticate to get in.
Not on automation, but
I tried it and people
MFA
complain
is
too
good.
much.
well, they need
Yeah,
to get over.
sometimes the complaining's just going to have to happen because I mean we get it here too, but that extra authentication really does, I think, help.
Well,
I'm really
you still
waiting
got
for
some-
biometric. I think that's going to be the only solution.
Trouble is, you still got a user logged into the machine, and if something happens, you're already past the authentication step at that point. So, yeah, it's good for your internal security, keeping unauthorized users off the machines, but I don't think it helps or does a thing for ransomware.
And the other thing is using free software for access. Like allegedly Entercom got hit through TeamViewer. I don't know if that's true or not. That's what the rumor was. And you're getting what you pay for on that. They're all logging in saying it's for personal use, not for corporate, that they can remote into their computers, that are using RDP with the common port and everything. And there are tons of password farmers out there and websites that just sit there looking all day at IP addresses with the ports for RDP and to get in.
I think the bigger problem here is having multiple passwords that are accessible or have been grabbed. And again, to go back to the site that I showed earlier, one site or another doesn't matter. You get a trusted site, but you need to make sure that the folks on your system don't have passwords that can be replicated or can be grabbed from a break-in. Because that's what they do. They'll break into a computer system and then they'll run against all the names, the dictionary passwords. And when they get that, now they have the hash to go off and get the other ones. And that could have been what happened in what David's talking about with TeamViewer. If you had somebody who got grabbed, they got his password, now they got in there and they get everybody else.
That and the fact that it seems that a lot of employees, and I'm not saying the engineers in this group, really don't care about the security of their company password to the point where they'll have little post-its around their screen or underneath their keyboard of their passwords. And I'm sure that everybody here knows at least one password of one of their colleagues. And not that that person even realizes you know it, but we all know them.
I always tell them not to tell me. I don't want to know. If I need in their computer, I can get in it.
All right.
Also, you know, don't let your users be administrators. Don't let them install their own software.
Ray, you had a comment here and you want to unmask and pop in?
Yeah, I'm not exactly an IT professional, but one thing I do is each workstation, I keep an external hard drive like you mount inside, and I keep a fresh image on there. My idea is if we get hit, you know, disconnect everything and then go through Kaspersky or something like that and try to make sure that drive is okay and put everything back together that way. And I've been using Cronus True Image, and I've had a lot of problems with the latest version of that. There's a free version. I don't know if you guys have used it. It's AOMEI. I've been using it for years. It's been around, and it'll actually make an image. So basically, you just take, you know, you take the corrupted hard drive out, put the new one in, and it's as up to date as when you created the image. But each one of the workstations, we have a hard drive, you know, in the foil wrapper on top of it. So I don't know if that's a good idea or not. But and also I heard that the Cox was actually caused by somebody getting the username and password of their VPN. I heard that's how they got in. I don't know if that's true or not.
That's the same for the Colonial Pipeline.
I've been told to try and not use free software, to use software that costs money. And this was from a lawyer, so I take it with a grain of salt. He goes, if you're buying the software, therefore you're protected also by liability if the things are wrong. And I mean, we're engineers. We're in charge of receiving the blame no matter what. So I don't think that's the case. But I do believe that you do get what you pay for when you're using free software.
But if you buy it and it turns out it's coming from China, you're not protected and you're not going to get any liability there.
Well, no one's going to buy their backup system on eBay. So
Really? Brian Hins has got a very good point here. He says splashtop.com sends an email to the user to verify they requested access. That's a nice safety feature, I would think. Ted Langdell asks, if you use free software, would your insurance company reject claims? And Mark Voris says he has flashed up. I'm trying to catch up with some of the things here in the.
Barry, I think any company that is running a network, which is 99.9% of them, if they're not smart enough to say to their insurance company, what are you telling us to, how are you telling us to do our backups that we're covered? Because any insurance company will have guidelines.
Well, it only makes sense whether you're talking about liability on site, at the transmitter location, or in the computer area. You need to take proper care not to misuse whatever tools you have at hand, and that's what's important here.
Yeah, well, I've been grown up for the last 57 years in the land of litigation. So, because I live in New York. And so I make sure anytime I'm setting up something that could have any liability, I always ask management to consult the insurance company to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's acceptable to their policy.
Ed makes the point, open source software is becoming a problem with public safety folks. Now that certainly makes a certain amount of sense because it's even less likely that you can control open source software. But then again, what do you do? I mean, so much of that's out there. Ed?
Well, Linux used to brag how safe it was, and now they're getting zapped too.
Well, it's not so much Linux components and libraries, but there are large elements of software, including software itself, that has been proposed for public safety purposes, and I think rightfully so. The government folks said, no, we don't know where the software really came from, who developed it, and because so much of it is developed on open source, we're not sure if there's going to be any maintenance to support, whether it's for cyber updates or just general management. More in our kind of little niche of the world, somebody's been proposing replacing EAS devices with open source software that has to be coming from an Asian country, and waiving all certification requirements for such open source software. My jaw hit the table when I saw that in the filing. That's insane, quite honestly. I mean, it may sound self-serving, but forget who I work for a second. That's a crazy approach for any public safety or national security system.
The other problem with open source is that the bad guys can look at the code. And when you get complicated software, somebody's always going to overlook something. It's inevitable. And so the hackers can figure that out much faster than they can anything else.
So we've had people ask here in the last couple of minutes about AnyDesk and ConnectWise. Any comments?
I like AnyDesk because you have to be chaperoned and watched when you're doing stuff. That's why I use it. I'm assuming it's not as it's not any safer than anything else, but I know its connections are pretty quick and you can get off right away. That's why I like it, and I like it also because it's not as popular as TeamViewer or some of the others. So. I like being in the minority instead of a majority program user.
Multi-factor is becoming more and more common. Sometimes you have to use it. One of the banks that I have requires it. Some of the others are starting to.
I'm using ConnectWise for access for the engineering side over here. Everybody else uses Splashtop, but ConnectWise is nice because I can open multiple sessions, or I can have multiple connections open at one time if I'm trying to work out a problem between devices or something. So it it also uses dual authentication to be able to log in. So it's pretty secure, pretty good program. Nice thing of it is you can bring your audio up from whatever you're logged into down here at the office to wherever you're at remotely and listen to it.
Ted talks about the whole concept here of Macs and iOS or typewriters. There was was it on 60 Minutes this past weekend, talking about ransomware, where a hospital got whacked and they operated on paper for about a day before they gave up.
Supposedly on the Colonial Pipeline, the reason they got up so fast is there were at least enough older employees in there that knew how to run the thing by turning valves. They said that the newer employees only know the computer programs.
Well, that's a true point. So
and I know where that would put this group.
So we want to back up data. We want to back up system images. We want to test them and keep them offline, or ideally, at least a copy out at the transmitter building or in the GM's back cottage or something. I don't know. We want something's not been mentioned, and that's updating and patching systems. And I've heard two ways of going on this, especially with automation systems. Some folks say, no. If it works, don't mess with it. Who was it here that just had a system that, David, you were talking about, had been running for 20 years? And on the other hand, if there is a patch that is security oriented, how do you know? How do you get it in there? He was
a closed network, Barry.
Well, that's the next thing on my list here. The question is, the automation companies need to be a little. I'm just asking this, and maybe you guys have a thought on it. They need to be more communicative when they make changes, when they do upgrades. They need to help the folks in the field understand the need and why. Then the next thing on my list here is segment your networks, check your security team's work, and again, test your incident response plan. Have a plan. What are you going to do when problems happen?
Easy. Every station has the same thing. They blame engineering. That's step one.
I could put that on the list.
And for crying out loud, make sure your automation system doesn't have access to the internet.
Yeah,
and step two, don't call the engineer every 5 minutes saying, is it fixed yet?
I would venture to say that the engineering is the least understood by any other department. So whatever's wrong must be their fault.
As I've always said, we are the ministry of blame.
What you got, Dave?
Got an RCS thumb drive. There he is. There's your backup.
Will it run?
Oh, and be careful with thumb drives.
Make sure it doesn't have a virus on it.
Somebody told me that some of these thumb drives, like you buy at the dollar store or something, could have stuff already put on them.
Yes.
Which is something I had never heard until a couple of years ago. We have our automation system on its own island. It's on its own little network. And the only access in from another network is through another PC.
The funniest backup story I've ever seen is going back maybe 15, 20 years, back in the days of carts and everything. The accounting system used to back up on floppy disks. Where'd they store the floppy disk? On a shelf in the hallway. What was right under that shelf? The big conveyor belt bulk eraser for the carts.
Nice.
And then they wondered one day why their backup wasn't working.
Ted asks where he can find comprehensive IT security training. I know Hal Hostetler is online here, and he's got some friends that do that. There you are. Unmute yourself. Hal brought us a group that it's on the archives that we had a discussion about security, and a company that will actually do it in an audit of your situation and make recommendations. And you can take a look at that. It's on the lunch gathering page.
Sorry about that. I was fumbling around getting my headset put on. What was the question?
Question had to do with getting training.
Oh, yeah. Well, yes, indeed. Roland Shore and Tower does do that. They have a comprehensive plan for pretty much any kind of an installation. They will happily come in and evaluate what you have, make recommendations, which you are free to take or not take at your discretion. They also offer a full range of services that can either augment your IT department or be your IT department, depending on your requirements. Does that answer anybody's questions?
I think Jerry Olson here, I think his comment about the floppy disk, that's the winner. You want to say it, Jerry, or shall I?
How about this one, Barry?
Yeah, but they don't make Ditto drives anymore, Dave. You can be in have a problem where you can't get the drive.
I got the software.
Jerry's line was the floppy disk being attached to the side of a file cabinet with a magnet.
Or better yet, put it under your old telephone every time it rang.
Yeah, well, there's that too, isn't there?
Provided you can actually find a floppy disk drive anymore. They're kind of rare.
Yeah.
Got one of those too.
They're antique.
Not that much you can get on one of them, comparatively.
Floppy drives went the way of the cart machines.
Depends which size floppy. You can still get some floppies still.
Got a 3.5-inch floppy on one of my on-air computers right now.
Well, funny you mentioned that. Barry mentioned about Audio Vault years ago. We had one out in a station out in central Nebraska that had the Core 2000 that was DOS, and everything had to be backed up on floppy, or when traffic was put into the system, it came in on a floppy disk. I hated that system. And back then I hated the support more. Threatened to send them the whole system in a shoebox with a jar of Vaseline if they didn't get us taken care of. Well, we were off the air for a day and a half because support wouldn't call back.
Oh, it was worse than that at the Audio Vault station I dealt with. One of the weekend college kids discovered that it was logged in as an administrator, and using the automation system wiped out the entire automation computer. Had to reload everything from scratch. Couldn't even get into it again because he changed all the passwords.
I have 13 floppies on my desk here that I use with my VNA. And one of these days I'm going to break down and replace that drive with a thumb drive.
I used all my old floppies for coasters. Put the coffee cup on.
I have here two 5.25-inch floppy drives. If somebody needs them and can figure out how to run them on something.
Yeah, there's little boxes that you can plug them into, and then they plug into your USB port. I have one of those. I use it for the old floppies or the old hard drives.
Those little connectors normally only work on 3.5s. There is one manufacturer out there that makes an add-in board that will let you run a 5.25, but I've only found one, and it isn't entirely comprehensive in how it works.
Now, we've talked about having the backups off-site. How many of you use your transmitter for that purpose? Anyone?
Yes.
I hear a yes. Do you do it physically by carrying it out there, or do you use the cloud, or do you use a link?
I do it physically. I use a couple of those wonderful 5 terabyte USB hard disks. I don't think it's the ultimate end all be all solution, but
It's a sneaker net
I mean,
of the.
those cheap consumer grade hard drives probably aren't the most reliable things.
Well, it's a sneaker net for the 21st century.
It works. It is air conditioned out there at least, so.
There are people that like to use cloud storage.
I was going to just ask, what's the feeling towards like carbonite?
I've got a friend that's a IT security pro. I know very little about this, but they use these firewalls. I think it's from Cisco or Juniper, and I mean they cost like $10,000. I couldn't consider buying one, but did these things work? I'm kind of surprised. You know, the Colonial Pipeline people and Cox don't have this. I guess if it gets inside, it's all for naught. You know, if it comes in through VPN. But he was telling me about those. I guess it's just part of their interface, but I think it's a hardware appliance firewall that they like. I don't know if it looks for incoming packet traffic and then tries to characterize the traffic, but does anybody use anything like that? No. I know nothing about it. No.
If you're willing to trust open source, you can use something called pfSense, which will do all of those things, and you don't have to spend $10,000 to play with it.
But we're back to open source and the potential. You have to know who's involved in it.
Well, you know, even SolarWinds and TeamViewer can get hacked. So.
Oh yeah. No question.
Again, determine your own level of trust. And
well, we also discovered that there's a couple of companies that work very hard at locking down files, that when you enter into making any changes, you have to have a password to change each file. So there's a lot of possibility.
Yeah. No, I mean, obviously, if you're a Fortune 500 company and you have an enterprise budget for a $10,000 switch or $10,000 VPN access router, use it.
Oh, sure.
Don't go get the open source thing for free.
And realistically,
if you're a small market station and you're one guy that does everything, it's better than a 10-year-old Netgear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, that's the whole thing. If this is your livelihood, if this is what pays your rent and your food and your staff, it's worth having the money to do it right. And this is the problem. A lot of people look for the cheapest, like they would buy a certain console that you can buy for a lot of less money than anything else.
That's why I said it has to be approached to management like it's an insurance policy. That's the only way they'll ever understand it.
Yep. So, you know, my boss sends me a link about the Cox attack after it happens and says, make sure we're safe. And I said, okay, I do the best I can with what you give me, and then 6 paragraphs of what I think are deficiencies. We're having a meeting later today.
Good for you.
Try to address some of it.
Good for you.
I also had to go to another market and clean up one of these ransomware messes. So.
What you got to do is convince them you can pay me $50,000 or you can pay them $1 million. I'm cheaper.
Right, and lose business because we're off the air for 5 days.
Yeah.
Well, we already have the mentality that says, I don't need an engineer because if I get a fire, I can buy a new transmitter cheaper than paying an engineer.
One thing that
But
was
somebody
never
still got to
noted,
install that.
Yeah, somebody's got to install that. And also, if you want to hold your users' hands on a daily basis, be my guest.
Barry, one thing that was never noted on the Intercom hits, and they were hit twice last year, not once.
Yes.
The streams were all down because they cut all the internet cables. And guess what? They lost a lot of revenue on the streams as well, which no one seemed to have pointed out. And I was shouting to deaf ears because they all cared about the over-the-air and no one thought about the streams. And some markets, I could not get a person to plug in an RJ45 for almost 2 weeks after the fact.
Well, yeah, Ted, your question is that's the point, that you have to have a plan. You just like everything else. What would you do if your transmitter goes off the air?
And I just thought of one other aspect that's IT related. It seems like many of the telephone systems are now VoIP tied into various network aspects. If you cut the network, you've cut off your phone. And if people can't phone you, or you can't get out to let your customers or your clients know, hey, we've got a problem here, but we'll be back up and blah, blah, blah. Maybe some guy's running a sale and is depending on your station or station group or cluster to get the word out about some sort of this weekend event, and he's expecting a lot of money to come in from that. If you aren't advertising for him, or his ads aren't running, and people don't come in, he's got a problem. So there's kind of a little domino effect that happens as a result of that.
This brings up the issue of diversity of your systems. Cable companies are currently pushing, buy everything from us. It all comes in on one wire. Well, everything goes down if that wire goes down, if you don't have a secondary system to back it up.
Well, it's the single point of failure issue that we have to fight all the way through, from the control room microphone to the antenna.
All our eggs in one basket.
Yep. Absolutely.
Worst thing in the world is putting phone on the computer network.
I remember one time the owner of a station went up to the transmitter with me, and this was on Mount Wilson, and the station ran 640 watts ERP. And he looks at the transmitter and he says, "You mean it all goes out that one little wire?" And I said, "Yeah, it does." And he says, "So if that wire breaks, we might as well all go home?" And I said, "Yeah, that's why we have backup." But this guy was never tight on getting backup, or, whatever we needed to do to have backup, to do whatever. He said, "Just do it." He said, "Watch the budget, but don't skimp."
This may be slightly off topic, but hopefully close enough. When you are designing your redundancy in your interconnects, particularly using the Bell services of various flavors, one of the problems that you run into, at least I did at Premier Radio when we had a lot of circuits, you may think that you're buying diverse paths, but if you do not buy them from the same company, Sprint or AT&T or whatever, you have no idea if you're getting diversity, because these providers buy and sell bandwidth from each other all the time for least cost route on their own side. So you may have ordered a circuit from Sprint or from AT&T, but may discover that they are actually running on the same piece of fiber multiple places.
I have a funny story about that back in the wireline days when we were on equalized lines. And I phone gang, it was the phone company, said, "We'd like to have you release your spare audio line." I said, "Well, what are you going to do? What's it?" "Well, we found out it's routed through 2 different paths, and we're going to route it through the, so that everything's all through the same path." I said, "No, they were ordered for diverse paths originally, so that if one of your COs catches fire, we don't go down." And he was kind of, "Oh, I guess we shouldn't do that then, huh?"
It isn't data, but I did have a a client some years ago that had a transmitter out in a neighborhood that was undergoing construction, rapid construction. And I'd say about every 5 to 6 days, one of the power lines would get cut and he'd be off the air, and the phone would ring and he'd be screaming and yelling about losing a several $1,000 remote at the car dealership and what should we do? And I said, well, I've sent you the memo about the generator. And I dusted it off and said it again. I think I said it about 5 times before I finally gave up. And some managers don't ever learn because spending money isn't in their DNA.
And it's not a problem till it's a problem.
Yeah.
Then it's your problem.
Yeah.
David, can I ask you to flush out the comment that you made about, is it generically just pulling all the network cables and all of a sudden you're not streaming?
Sure. What's your question about it?
Well, is it just that simple that of all the things you disconnect, one of the network cables is your feed to the streaming service? Okay.
Yep. And luckily, I was able to talk most of my engineers back into getting the streams up, but there were some that weren't. And unfortunately, there were new people, and I'm saying, okay, you need to go from this cable to this cable. He goes, oh, I was told I can't do that. And like, Robert went through one of our installs. He can say we were pretty exact on what to do and where to plug in and everything. And unfortunately, give it 2 months after you do the install, things change, and you don't know that they've changed them. And by the way, when I was at Entercom, Robert LaFord did one of the cleanest installs of the streaming stuff that I had ever seen. He even gave me my own rack. I was really happy when I came to Atlanta. And he's muted because he doesn't know how to turn on a microphone.
Well, that kind of reinforces the need for good documentation too, because when things go wrong and you don't have documentation, it just takes that much longer to get it back up.
Yes, absolutely. And as people that have worked with me know, I keep good documentation, but I also have an incredible memory that I'm able to tell you what wire is connected where in my head, because
I don't see any wires in your head.
Barry, don't go.
Because he lost them all.
But it was nice that I was able to tell people, okay, you want to go to the second connector on the left, plug this in. I want this going to this. I was always able to tell them exactly where everything is and what port they were going to. And that's one of the curses I have of having a really good memory.
That's
also of designing the equipment myself.
That's the case here too. In fact, I keep telling everybody, God forbid I should get hit by a bus, because they would all be in a world of trouble.
How many of us feel like we're Sheldon Cooper?
I used to think that on information I picked up many turns back, when it was harder to get a number, you design things slower, you might only build a gadget a week or a month. And if you saw another station, you'd look at it and you had a lot of time for the limited info to soak in. And nowadays we're trying to sip out of the fire hose. There is information blowing by we will never know about. And I think one of the problems that I'm hearing in this call is we're a mix of people in very big and very small situations, everything in between. In a lot of many of us have worked in places where we were the last word. From the doorbell to the fire escape, this physical plant was ours. If we took it on, we had some dealing with it. We watched them install it, or they shipped the crates and we unpacked it and installed it. And the bigger and more corporate you get, the more different departments are involved. And maybe IT is its own thing, and RF is its own thing, and automation systems, or for television production systems, becomes another little enterprise within the company. There's no one person even knows what they all do. And suddenly the bonus situation, which side the bread is buttered on, depends on who you are. The example of, okay, we combined all the radio and TV things into one set of buildings, got rid of half the general managers. whoever ramrodded that project finished, earned their bonus, got their recommendation letters, and moved on to their next job. It's not the old days where you might be in a company for a few decades and you had a lot of corporate memory and a lot of, I miss the days reporting to an owner, and we were a pretty big company. We were billing $250 million a year when that seemed like real money. But they would look at your idea and say, this isn't bad, but we're not going to do it. You had to have someone who could say, this is good and we'll do it. This is pretty good, but set it aside. We may come back to it if it ever gets cheaper. But so many companies, you have so many decision makers who they'll do what's right for them that day. And a month or a quarter or a year later, there will be no memory that ever happened. And there are no autopsies later to say, we spent this money. Did it make us money? Did the world get better because we made these changes? And so often no one asks those questions.
I agree, Dave, because a lot of the companies I've worked for in the last few years, at least, care more about the instant stock price than they do their longevity.
I'm going to break in for just a second here, David, because we're starting to have folks have to go off to other things. And I want to point out that when you talked about documentation, it really leads into next week where we're going to have Wirecad to speak with us and talk about their product and how they can help with documentation. And so that's kind of one thing leading to the other.
Yeah, and I suggest everybody try their free demo on their site. It's really a great product. I love Wirecad.